Grab your popcorn and snacks, find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust. Turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Hey everybody, welcome. I finally got the intro right. How's everybody doing today? Happy Sunday. Happy Sunday after New Year's. Well, happy 2026. Anyway, let me move the mic. You guys can't hear me. Ha. Always a mistake. Anyway, welcome everybody. It is Sunday reading day. I apologize for running a little late today. One of my cables that I connect to for the show has decided to cross its version of the Rainbow Bridge, so I was looking for a cable. So I got a temporary cable. Anyway, welcome. Sunday reading day. We're going to be reading this book for a few more weeks. For every Sunday for a while. Oh, I like it. Hear the echo? Hi, everybody. My name's Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team based out of Northern California. We're 45 strong up and down the state. Hi, TPRB. Which means if you have a man today, if you have a paranormal problem, we can get to you. Or if you think you might have a paranormal problem. Let me get my stuff set up over here now that we're up. Take that one. Take that, you swine. Let me get these things set up. This is my chat room. Okay. So what's going to happen today is I'm not doing readings this afternoon. What I'm doing is as a Sunday tradition that started at least 3 years ago. I'm reading from a paranormal themed book. Sometimes these stories are true, sometimes they're not. This one in particular is written by a good friend of mine, author Sylvia Shults. It's called The Spirts of Christmas, the Darkside of the Holidays. And it's a really good book. There are dark stories in here. There's ghost stories, a little bit of everything mixed in here, But all these stories have to do with either Christmas or wintertime. So that's what we're doing. So today's first one is going to be The Messenger of Donner Pass. Okay. So we'll get started, read for about an hour, and then call it a day as far as that goes. So let me get these glasses back on. There we go. Oh, well, there you are. Okay, just to let you know, over TikTok, I do have a goal of collecting 10 Santa Cocos. If you guys can help me out with that. Hi, Marisa. If you guys can help me out with that 10 Santa Cocos, I'm trying to get at least 30,000 likes for this book today. I see you all in there. If you do gift, thank you for coming. If you do gift, one of my moderators should be in there, or just know that I can't see you flashing across the screen over there, TikTok. So I thank you all for the gifting. Okay, I think ahead of time. I thank you all. Just know that I thank you. All right, so let's get going. And like I said, we're probably going to have at least 2 more weeks, maybe 3, on this book. Because it's almost 400 pages, and we're around 121 page or whatever it is. So okay, we're gonna go ahead and read for an hour. It's now 12:20 Pacific time. We're gonna go ahead and read till 1:20 Pacific time, and here we go, or thereabouts. As long as the plug stays in, we have power. All right, I live right here, and Donner Pass. I'm not saying I live real close, but it's within about a 45-minute to an hour driving for me to get to Donner Pass. And you guys know the stories, I hope, about the Donner Party when they came across at the worst time of the year. At the worst time of the year, worst storm ever on record. And all their wagons got trapped. Everything got trapped. And unfortunately, they were running out of food. So they had to resort to cannibalism to survive until rescue came. So our first story is The Messenger of Donner Pass. All right, so here we go. A trucker named Mark Elf shared an eerie experience he had that stretched out over 2 Christmas seasons. In late autumn of 1996, Mark's father had gone to a friend's house for a visit. As soon as he walked into the house, he clutched his chest, dropped to the floor, and died of a massive heart attack. The police called Mark and asked him to go take care of his mother. Mark rushed to his mother's side and made all the necessary phone calls. As evening faded into night, family began to gather at the house. Mark needed to go out for cigarettes. So, knowing his mother now had the comfort of family around her, he left the house for a quick trip to the gas station. As he pulled into the gas station parking lot, Mark said he just had a strange feeling that his father's soul just wasn't there where it was supposed to be. He couldn't explain the feeling, even to himself. Mark got out of the car and started to walk to the convenience store. Spare some change, mister? Could I maybe wash your windshield for you? The bum looked harmless enough. But Mark wasn't in the mood for much interaction. Instead, he pulled out a $5 bill, gave it to the guy, and asked him to pray for his dad. The bum happily took the fiver and started praying loudly, just to make sure things were copacetic. Mark gave the guy a good hard look. It was then that he noticed the bum's eyes were a penetrating shade of blue, so piercing blue that could stop you in your tracks. Mark thanked the guy for his prayers and asked him his name. The bum replied, "I'm Irish." Shaking his head, Mark went into the convenience store, bought his cigarettes, and headed home. Several months later, the encounter with the bum stuck in Mark's mind, and every time he went to that gas station, he kept an eye out for the guy. A few years later, Mark saw the man again. Mark asked the guy if he remembered him and if his name was Irish. "Yeah, I'm Irish, but nah, I don't remember you." Mark realized with a jolt that the guy's eyes were brown, so deep that they were almost black. They were not the startling blue Mark had seen the night his father had passed away. But that was only part of the story. Much of Mark's driving took place on I-80, Interstate 80, in all kinds of weather. Mark grew up in California, so he didn't have much experience of driving in the snow and ice. Once, though, he was teamed with another driver who managed to jackknife the truck during a blizzard in Kansas. After that, Mark had a healthy respect for driving, especially in the winter. Christmas was fast approaching, and Mark was doing short hops from Chicago to California. Making his way home for Christmas on December 23rd, he pulled into the Alamo truck stop for a break. Donner Pass was before him. Mark was toying with the idea of trying to get a little sleep before tackling the pass. But he was so exhausted. He knew an hour nap might turn into 8 hours of solid sleep. A storm was blowing in, and Mark still wasn't sure what his next move should be. He climbed down from the cab of his truck and headed in to use the restroom. Mark was walking about 10 feet behind a group of other drivers when one of them turned around and spoke to him. "If you're trying to get home, you better go over the pass right now." Mark didn't know this guy and had never talked to him, but the man had the same brilliant blue eyes Mark had seen the night his father had died. Mark turned on his heel and went straight back to his truck. He gunned the engine and he headed up Donner Pass. The CB crackled with incoming weather reports as Mark drove. He made it all the way through the pass and stopped at a rest area when he was safely through the mountains. As Mark pulled out of that rest area, the snow was falling thickly, and he heard over the radio that Donner Pass had been shut down, and it stayed closed for a day and a half. He had made it through the pass just in time. If Mark hadn't followed that unknown trucker's advice, he'd have been stuck at the truck stop over Christmas. As it was, he made it safely home to Los Angeles after delivering his final load. My mother had a smile for the first time on Christmas since my father had passed away the Christmas before. Mark has never seen anyone with blue eyes quite like that again, but he is always on the lookout for them. To this day, if I see piercing blue eyes like that, I listen to the words being spoken. All right, just a quick reminder, I do have permission to read this book from the author. It's self-published, so no internet police or anything like that. And I am cleaning up some language within the book as well. Okay, so we don't have the internet police. Okay, so here we go. House of Plenty. Madison County, Illinois, in the southern part of the state, is a quiet rural area. In 1879, Timothy Grouse built a home for himself in the town of Highland. 100 years later, in the early 1980s, Ken and Judy Ernst rented part of the house for use as a small bakery. Within a decade, Judy's baked goods business had become so popular, the couple bought the entire house. For a while, they lived in the house and ran a small restaurant. But by the end of the 1980s, the restaurant had grown to fill the entire building, and the couple made their home elsewhere. The House of Plenty restaurant is thought to be haunted by the spirit of the original owner, Timothy Grouse. The story goes that Grouse hosted a party in his home in honor of the town's early Swiss settlers, who were planning a trip back to Switzerland to visit their families. The plans for a joyful reunion turned to tragedy, though. The ship carrying the travelers sank, claiming the lives of over 300 passengers. According to Chad Lewis, writer in Illinois' Road Guide to Haunted Locations, some people believe that after losing so many of his friends in the sinking, Timothy Grouse continues to wait for their return. The restaurant building is notorious for having things mysteriously go missing. One day, Judy was in the kitchen baking an angel food cake. She left it on the counter to cool. Several hours later, she came back to find that the cake had vanished. Neither the cake nor the pan was ever found. Well, you might be thinking to yourself, a missing cake? That's not so bad. Someone left an angel food cake unattended in my kitchen for several hours. Of course it would be gone. But try this on for size. Someone who had once lived in the home stopped by for a visit. She asked Judy if she'd ever had anything go missing, and Judy mentioned the story of the cake and the pan. As she spoke, the visitor's face blanched, ghostly white. Then the visitor shared a story of her own. Years before, her mother had been boiling potatoes on the stove in that same kitchen. Her husband had come home, and Mama went into the living room to greet him. She gave him a quick kiss, then came immediately back to the kitchen to check on the food. The mother was stunned to discover on her return that the pot of boiling potatoes had vanished into thin air. The dining room of the restaurant is the scene of strange phenomena that happens every Christmas. There is a fireplace in the dining room, with several tables for guest dining arranged near the hearth. Every year around Christmas, Ken Ernst would notice a small pile of charred pipe tobacco on the corner of one of the tables. How it got there was a mystery, until a former occupant of the home brought in an old photograph of the Grant's family, the home's original owners. Standing in the photograph was a young man who was smoking a pipe. He was identified as Grouse's son, and it is believed that he liked to spend his winter evenings in that very room smoking a pipe while sitting next to the fireplace. The House of Plenty is now closed, and the good smells of home-cooked food no longer fill the air. However, as Christmas approaches, maybe the scent of good pipe tobacco still lingers in the dining room, and Timothy Grouse's pipe-loving son still knocks his spent ash onto a heavy table near the fireplace. All right. Next one is the USS Constellation. I actually built this ship. I used to build the schooner models, like three-masted schooners and things like that. I used to build a bunch of those, and one of the ones I built was a Constellation. They're fun to build. There's two ways you can do it. You can buy the old style ones where you sew all the sails together and all that. I had the plastic ones, the Revels, or mine, or whoever made them. But what I would do was I would actually sew the sails onto the yard arms. So those were actually sewed on there by hand. One of them, like I said, was USS Constitution. After America won independence from England, the new young nation had miles upon miles of coastline to protect. Ships were built for America's first navy, to form America's first navy. One of these was USS Constellation, 175 feet long, with 3 main masts. She was launched at Harris Creek, Maryland on September 7th, 1797, as a 36-gun frigate. Her first captain was Thomas Truxton, and he started the ship's bloody career with a bang, quite literally. On February 5th, 1799, the Constellation got into a battle with the French frigate the Insurance. We're just going to go with that. In the West Indies. The French ship was captured, but in the heat and terror of battle, a sailor named Neil Harvey deserted his post. Truxton found out and ordered a Lieutenant Sterrett to run Harvey through with his sword. After the battle, Harvey, wounded but still alive, was tied to the end of a cannon and blown to pieces on Truxton's orders as a warning to the other sailors. Harvey's ghost is one of the most frequently seen on the ship. He's even been mistaken for a costume tour guide. The Constellation saw many missions throughout her long service to the U.S. Navy. She provided support for land troops fighting Seminole Indians and distinguished herself in the War of 1812. She tussled with slave traders and Barbary pirates. Barbary Coast, you guys. And sailed as far as West Africa, China, and Hawaii. In 1845, the ship sailed to the Navy Yard at Norfolk, Virginia, for a complete overhaul. She'd been given a new stern in 1829, between 1829 and 1830, and the hull of a wooden ship needed to be rebuilt every 16 years, or so anyway. We don't know how much of the original ship's material was left after that 1845 to 55 rebuild, but it was enough to keep the ghosts hanging around. The Constellation's rebuild was finished in 1855. The ship was downgraded from a 36-gun frigate to a 22-gun sloop. The Constellation was the last ship of the United States Navy to be powered completely by sail. The Navy was moving towards steam power. In 1893, the ship docked at the naval station at Newport, Rhode Island, and served as a stationary training ship until 1914. Then it sat neglected for decades. In 1940, Franklin D. Roosevelt recommissioned her as the flagship of the United States Atlantic Fleet. When the money for that project dried up, the ship was towed to Boston. In 1953, a group of historically minded Maryland citizens raised funds to bring the Constellation home to Baltimore. By September of 55, the ship had come to her final home. And that's when the ghost started to haunt supposedly started to haunt the ship, and the stories began. Several ships, including the submarine Pike, were moored nearby. Their sailors told stories of strangeness on the Constellation, odd noises, spook lights, ghostly shapes, and misty figures walking on her decks. By December 1955, Lieutenant Commander Alan Ross Brom had heard many of the stories. He decided the situation warranted an investigation. He called up a friend of his who was a photographer and invited him to bring his camera aboard. They set up the camera facing the ship's wheel. Then they waited. At exactly 11:59, 47 seconds p.m., on that cold December night, Brom smelled the faint odor of something like gunpowder. Immediately after that, he saw the translucent, bluish-white phantom of a 19th century U.S. Navy captain. The phantasm wore gold epaulets and a cocked hat, and was slightly bent over at the waist, reaching down with its right hand as if to draw a sword. At the click of the camera shutter, the ghost vanished. But Brom had his picture. Many witnesses to the spirits of the ship report smelling gunpowder in the air just before the apparitions manifest. Captain Truxton especially announces his impending presence with the acrid tang of gunpowder. And all the Constellation spirits seem to be most active around midnight, especially in the week between Christmas and New Year's Day. There are several ghosts on board to keep Captain Truxton and Neil Harvey company. An 11-year-old boy served on the ship from 1820 to 1822 as a surgeon's assistant. In 1822, he was cornered by two sailors on the roll-up deck and stabbed and unalived. No one knows why. Another sailor, overwhelmed by the harsh life at sea, unalived himself. Then there's the spirit of Carl Hansen, a night watchman who worked on the Constellation in the mid-20th century until an alarm system was installed in 1963. Hansen is the only spirit on the ship who didn't die a violent death, and he's believed to haunt the ship because he actually is happy to be there. His ghost has been seen enjoying a game of cards on the lower decks. In 1964, a Catholic priest came aboard for a tour. No one from the Maryland Naval Militia was around at the time, so he went below decks on his own. He was met by a guide who seemed very knowledgeable about the inner workings and terminology of the ship. After the informative tour, the priest thanked the guide and headed for the exit. As he was leaving, he ran into the other guides. He complimented them on finding such an enthusiastic volunteer. The guides exchanged nervous glances. "There's no one below right now," one said. The men all rushed down to find the intruder, but there was no one there. The Constellation, at rest now in Baltimore Harbor, is a prized artifact of American history, and apparently some of her crew are still celebrating the holidays late at night, walking the decks of this grand ship. Not bad, huh? I've heard a lot about that. That ship's been on TV too. All right, guys, I'm trying to get 10 Santa Cocos. If you guys can help me out with that, that would be great. Otherwise, we're just hanging out. We're hanging out together. Lord Combermere returns. The second Lord Combermere had a favorite chair in the library at his grand estate, Combermere Abbey. He was so fond of the spot that he was photographed sitting comfortably in that chair while his funeral was being held 4 miles away. There were two viscounts, that held the title of Lord Combermere in the 19th century. The first Viscount was a cavalry commander in the early 1800s. In 1817, he was appointed governor of Barbados. It was this or Combermere that had a curious connection to the supernatural. He was governor at the time that moving coffins were causing great consternation for the Chase family. The Chase family vault was a beautiful crypt in the burying ground at Christchurch Parish in Barbados. Made of coral, carved stone, and concrete walls 2 feet thick, it was sealed with a massive slab of blue marble. The vault was. You couldn't get in the vault. Impenetrable. God, my stutter is really bad today. Impenetrable. That's why it was such a shock to find the coffins that had been placed reverently in the tomb were found to have been rearranged with violent force. Whenever the vault was opened for another burial, the coffins of Chase family members were found thrown haphazardly around the vault, instead of remaining where they'd been placed and replaced with tender care. Lord Combermere, the governor, had heard the unsettling stories and decided to put a stop to the nonsense. He ordered the vault opened. He had slaves sprinkle sand on the floor to capture footprints of any intruders, human or animal. Then, when the vault was closed, he pressed his governor's seal into the fresh cement. 2 years later, he returned to inspect the vault. The outside of the tomb was as rock solid as ever, but inside all was chaos. The 6 coffins had been tossed about like toys, and the sand on the floor was completely undisturbed. The second Viscount, born in 1818, went by the splendid name of Wellington Henry Stapleton Cotton. In 1891, when this gentleman was visiting London, he was run over by a carriage and suffered injuries to both legs. The sturdy 73-year-old recovered well, and 6 weeks later, he was able to get around with the aid of crutches. But a blood clot developed in Lord Combermere's heart, and on December 1st, 1891, he dropped dead. The Lord's funeral was held on Sunday, December 5th, at St. Margaret's in the town of Wrenbury, 4 miles from the family estate. Many prominent persons attended the funeral, so the time of services was held back a bit to give the honored mourners ample time to arrive. The services began at 2 in the afternoon. It just so happened that a photographer, Sybil R. Corbett, had been engaged to take pictures of the family estate. Lord Combermere's funeral, while unfortunate, was timed at the same time as the photographer. Since most of the household would be away at church, Corbett set up an hour-long exposure in the library, confident that no one would wander in and disturb the ongoing photography project. Other projects came along, and Corbett didn't develop the plates she'd taken at Combermere Abbey until August of the next year, 8 months after she'd exposed them. To her astonishment, the photograph she took in the library showed a white, translucent figure in the left side of the picture, sitting in Lord Combermere's favorite chair. The apparition wasn't complete. There was a head sitting atop a clearly defined collar, a shoulder, and a right arm ending in a hand that rested lightly on the arm of the chair. Sybil Corbett checked her diary. Sure enough, the photograph had been taken on December 5th, the day of Lord Combermere's funeral. She did some further investigating with the family and realized that the exposure had been made at 2 p.m., at the same time the delayed funeral was being conducted. Skeptics argued that perhaps a servant had come into the library during the hour-long exposure, sat in the Lord's chair just long enough to register on the photographic plate, then gotten up and left. But the family had agreed that the timing for the photography was, sadly, ideal, as most of the family and staff of the household would be at church for the funeral. Besides, the ghostly figure seemed to have a bald head and a light beard. According to Corbett's diary, the only men in the house at the time were her brother, the butler, and 2 footmen. All 4 men were young and beardless. So it would seem that Lord Combermere returned to his library for one last rest in his favorite armchair before going on to an even more final rest. The Brown Lady of Raynham Hall. Another startling ghost photograph comes from another stately English home, Raynham Hall in Norfolk. This one might just be the most famous ghost photograph of all time. Raynham Hall was once the home of Lady Dorothy Townshend, who married Viscount Charles Townshend in 1713. As in many ghost stories, all was not peaceful country life at the hall. Lady Townsend died on March 29th, 1726, at the age of 40, under mysterious circumstances. The official cause of death was smallpox. However, there were rumors that her ladyship had been pushed down the grand staircase, and the fall had broken her neck. During the Christmas season of 1835, a Colonel Loftus stayed at Raynham Hall as a guest. His stay was interrupted by a nighttime visitation of a beautiful woman. The Colonel described her as a noble-looking lady who was wearing a fashionable dress of brown satin. Her regal looks were spoiled, though, by the terrifying fact that she had no eyes. Only empty sockets gaped where her eyes should have been. Colonel Loftus made a sketch of his midnight visitor, and a portrait was painted from the sketch and hung in the guest bedroom, where the brown lady made most of her appearances. Decades later, in 1786, the future King George was a guest at the hall, and stayed in that particular room. The brown lady's appearance sent the Prince Regent shrieking into the hallway in his nightshirt, a rather embarrassing situation for royalty. After that, he swore he would never set foot in Raynham Hall again, a promise he kept for the rest of his days. The brown lady continued her haunting of the hall well into the 20th century. On September 19th, 1936, two photographers from the magazine Country Life were on assignment taking pictures of the stately hall. Indra Shira was snapping the photos, accompanied by art director Captain Hubert Proven. Shira and Proven were setting up a shot of the grand main staircase of the house at around 4 p.m. when Shira saw an ethereal, veiled form coming slowly down the stairs. Proven didn't see a thing. He even bet Shira £5 that nothing weird would show up when the picture was developed. He lost the bet. The brown lady had exchanged her customary brown satin dress for a filmy white veil, but her form showed up distinctly in the picture. One of the most famous ghost photographs in the world ran for the first time in Country Life magazine. Appropriately enough, it ran in that year's December issue. The Ghost of Anne Boleyn. The Tower of London comes by its ghostly reputation. Honestly, built by William the Conqueror in 1078, it has stood as a symbol of the might of England for nearly 1,000 years. It was originally a royal palace as well as a defensive fortress. In fact, Her Majesty's Royal Palace and Fortress, the Tower of London, to use its proper name, is still officially a residence of the monarch. The Queen has a house on site called the Queen's House. If the ruler is male, of course, it becomes the King's House. We can call it Charlie's house. We'll just say. The kings and queens of England realized quite soon after its construction that the tower was just as good at keeping people in as it was at keeping people out. So it's been used as a prison since 1100, when Ranulph Flambard was imprisoned within the tower by Henry I. Flambard was also, by the way, the first person to escape from the tower. There have been many prisoners, royal, noble, and otherwise, who have met their ends, either on the tower grounds or on nearby Tower Hill. Only 7 people were executed within the tower before the 20th century. One of these unfortunates was Anne Boleyn, the second wife of Henry VIII, who was beheaded for treason in 1536. Her ghost is said to haunt the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, where she is buried, but she is also known to roam the grounds of the White Tower while carrying her own severed head. Anne Boleyn is arguably the most famous ghost who wanders the tower due to her ill-fated relationship with Henry VIII. Queen Anne even almost got one poor sentry court-martialed. The guard was found unconscious at his post outside the King's House one winter morning in 1864. He was accused of falling asleep while on duty and put on trial. At the hearing, though, the sentry had a really good explanation for his unconscious state. He'd been standing guard when a white figure came towards him out of the early morning mist. The sentry challenged the figure 3 times, but the silent figure never answered. It just kept walking slowly towards him. Alarmed, the sentry lunged at the figure with his bayonet fixed, intending to run it through, whatever it was. But a flash of fire raced up the rifle barrel and knocked the sentry out cold. Luckily, other guards, including officers, came forward to testify at the hearing. They said they had seen the apparition too, from a window in the Bloody Tower. After some discussion, members of the court realized that the phantom had been seen by multiple witnesses, just below the room where Anne had spent her last night alive, which was the night before her execution on May 19, 1536. The sentry was cleared. As for the doomed queen, she still wanders the tower, with her head tucked underneath her arm, as far as anyone knows. Okay. The Eileen Moore Lighthouse. Need water, man. Really dry today. Don't know why I'm so dry today. Hope you're enjoying the ghost stories. Lighthouse keepers are a sturdy, devoted breed, dedicated to the demanding job of keeping their lights burning to guide sailors safely to land. In fact, there is only one case on record of lighthouse keepers abandoning their post. The Eileen Moore Lighthouse was built on a rocky island off the west coast of Scotland. It was a remote and forbidding place, even for a lonely lighthouse. That made the Eileen Moore Light even more vital to the safety of those waters. The locals who lived on nearby islands believed that particular island was haunted. Only fools, they said, stayed on the island overnight. But the three men who had signed on as lighthouse keepers, of course, had no choice. That was their job, to stay on the island and tend the Eileen Moore Lighthouse. What happened to those men is still unknown. On the night of December 15th, 1900, the brigantine Fairwind was making her way through the seas near the Eileen Moore Lighthouse. Sailors on deck saw a lifeboat in the water. At first, they thought the boat was adrift, carrying corpses from a shipwreck. Bodies in the boat were pale, dressed in rags, but they were moving. The sailors on the Fairwind could see that the men in the lifeboat were rowing and that they were heading for the lighthouse. The tiny craft with its ghastly cargo soon disappeared into the blackness. Later that same night, a storm whipped up, and sailors on the Fairwind and other ships noticed that the Eileen Moore Light was out. The ship's captains were furious at the oversight. Luckily, no boats were wrecked in the stormy darkness. Days passed, and the lights remained eerily dark. The sailors on passing ships began to be concerned. Something was definitely wrong. There were 3 men on that island. If one of them, or even 2, had been taken ill, there still should have been a man left to restart the light. At the very least, they should have been able to send some sort of distress signal to shore. But the island stayed completely shrouded in the darkness. A supply ship finally made it out to the island to investigate on the day after Christmas. They found no sign of any of the 3 men and absolutely no clues as to where they had gone. The searchers found 2 strange things worth noting. The foul weather gear among the lighthouse supplies, the oilskin coats, and heavy rubber boots, was all gone. The investigators also found shreds of seaweed scattered around. Not so unusual on an island, except that it was of a kind unknown in that area. The searchers did find the lighthouse logbook. That provided no clues, but only deepened the mystery. The head keeper, Thomas Marshall, wrote that a vicious storm had pummeled the lighthouse for 3 days, beginning on December 12th. The log noted that the men spent those 3 days in a state of near panic, praying for their lives and crying, which is strange behavior for stalwart lighthouse tenders. Had the desolation of their post made all 3 of the men snap? All at the same time? The final entry in the log was dated December 15th. Marshall wrote only this: "Storm is ended, sea calm. God is good. God is over all." But here's the creepy part. Besides the fact 3 men simply vanished, on the 3 days mentioned in the log, December 12th to the 15th, there was no storm. As a matter of fact, on the island of Lewis, just 20 miles away, the weather for this 3 had been unusually calm. A storm had blown into the area on the night of December 15th, the day Marshall, but the seas were finally calm. The official inquiry into the desertion of the Eileen Moore Lighthouse was unable to reach any conclusion as to the fate of Thomas Marshall and his 2 companions. But the sailors on board the Fairwind couldn't put the ghastly sight of the lifeboat filled with living corpses out of their minds. the boat that was being rowed steadily towards the lighthouse by dead men. There was a local legend that said sometimes the ghosts of shipwrecked sailors came ashore to claim the living. Okay, here's one you guys probably heard about. This one goes pretty much with all the stories you hear about the Bermuda Triangle. The mystery of the Mary Celeste. On November 7th, 1872, the merchant brigantine Mary Celeste left the port of New York. She was bound for Genoa, Italy, with a cargo of alcohol meant to be added to wine to fortify it. Benjamin Spooner Briggs was her captain, in charge of a crew of 7. Also on board were Captain Briggs' wife, Sarah, and their daughter, Sophia Matilda, just 2 years old. On December 4th, the crew of the Da Gracia saw the Mary Celeste drifting in the Atlantic, 400 miles east of the Azores. She was full of cargo and carried 6 months' worth of food and water. But the ship's cat was the only living creature on board. Captain Briggs, his family, and the 7 crew members were nowhere to be found. They were never heard from again. So, yeah, and I believe that's also the one where when they went into the mess room, the meal was all there, like they'd been eating, and that was it. Untouched meal. The Palatine Light. The ghostly ship, known as the Palatine, has appeared for nearly 300 years in the waters off the coast of Rhode Island. The eerie apparition has gained fame as the Palatine Light, and it usually manifests as a crimson glow on the horizon. The ship was probably a British vessel called the Princess Augusta. It left Rotterdam, Holland, in August 1738, carrying 240 passengers. Many of them were immigrants from the Palatine region of Germany, headed for a new life in Philadelphia. A few weeks into the voyage, the supplies of fresh water somehow got contaminated, causing an outbreak of fever and diarrhea on board. Captain George Long died, as did several crew members, and more than half the passengers. First mate Andrew Brooke took charge of the ship, and the immigrants' suffering began in earnest. The ship floundered around the Atlantic for an incredible 3 months after the contaminated water. After having contaminated water, supplies of food and fresh water ran dangerously low. Brooke, now in charge, decided he could make a few bucks on the side by charging the passengers for the measly amount of food they were given. The ship ran into storm after storm in the winter months, which pushed it ever farther north. During Christmas week, the ship was caught in a vicious snowstorm somewhere in the Devil's Triangle. See? The region of the Rhode Island coast between Montauk Point, Block Island, and the mainland. The remaining crew just snapped. They plundered what they could from the ship, launched the ship's longboats, and abandoned the immigrants to their fate. The Princess Augusta, adrift without experienced sailors to man the tiller, tossed in the freezing waves until she beached herself on the rocky shore of Sandy Point on Block Island on December 27th. 20 more passengers died when the ship ran aground. The tragic event was immortalized by John Greenleaf Whittier's poem, The Palatine, written in 1867. In the poem, the Block Islanders who came down to shore to investigate the wrecked ship are portrayed as heartless looters, no better than the crew who'd abandoned the ship in the first place. Finding nothing of value aboard the stricken ship, in the poem, the islanders simply set the ship on fire and pushed it back into the sea, passengers and all. Fortunately, this is not what actually happened. The story that Block Islanders prefer to tell is that they helped the 17 people left alive on the battered ship. The islanders took the immigrants to Simon Ray's farm, but the shipwreck and the privation of the previous weeks had taken their toll. Some of the immigrants regained their health, but most of them were beyond saving. As for the ship itself, it wasn't worth repairing. As it was still sitting wrecked on the rocky shore, the islanders feared that it would become a hazard to navigation, so they set fire to it. A freak wind lifted the burning ship into the swell of a wave, and it drifted back out to sea. The ship would claim one more victim as it left the shore forever, though. One woman was still below decks when the ship was fired. Half crazed from the terror of the voyage, she refused to leave the burning deck. The islanders watched in horror as the madwoman was burned alive, her shrieks echoing into the night. The ship is still seen, even today. It manifests between Christmas and New Year's Eve, usually on the anniversary of the fire. As reporter Edwin C. Hill wrote in 1934, there are people living on Block Island who will tell you, with their hand on a book, that they have gazed seaward in the blackness of night, startled by a bright radiance at sea, and have watched, with straining eyes, while the Palatine, blazing from trunk to keelson, swept along the horizon. For many years, the abandoned woman's screams were said to accompany that queer crimson light on the darkening horizon. The light of Palatine forever burning, yet never consumed. Merry Christmas from the Bell Witch. I think you guys have heard of the Bell Witch as well. It's been 200 years since the Bell family of Tennessee was tormented by a mysterious entity known only as the Bell Witch. But the events that unfolded between the years of 1817 and 1821 have remained evergreen in American ghost lore. And they are some of the most amazing tales in Tennessee history. John Bell, a prosperous cotton farmer, was born in North Carolina in 1750. He, his wife Lucy, and their 9 children moved to Robertson County, Tennessee in 1804. Bell purchased many acres of land along the Red River and set about improving it even more. He cleared fields, planted orchards, and built a home for his large family. He even built a one-room schoolhouse where his children and his neighbors' children could get an education. This being Tennessee in the early 19th century, John Bell's cotton plantation was worked by slaves, but Bell and his family were very devout, and Bell himself seemed to let his religious beliefs dictate his treatment of his slaves. He doesn't seem to have been a particularly harsh master. John Bell knelt to lead his family in prayers 3 times a day, and he opened his house as a gathering place for prayer meetings, Bible studies led by Lucy Bell, and other worship services. John Bell was socially and politically active as well. He dressed the part of a wealthy, influential businessman and landowner. When he went to town on business, he made an imposing figure in his tailor coat, which had silver buttons and a high fashionable beaver hat. Bell made many speeches in support of political candidates whose values aligned with his, and he was known for personal integrity and wasn't afraid to speak up for his beliefs. John Bell was an upstanding citizen, a devout Christian, the benevolent head of a large family, a careful steward of his land and property, and a prosperous businessman. That's what made the events to come even more startling. One day in 1817, Bell was inspecting a cornfield when he saw a bizarre-looking animal crouched in the middle of a row of corn. The creature had the body of a dog, but the head of a rabbit. Startled and horrified by the anomaly, Bell shot at it several times. He didn't hit it, but the strange animal vanished. After this encounter, odd things started to happen in the Bell home. At first, the activity was very subtle. Family members would hear tapping on the windows at night, or rats gnawing on the bedposts, or a sound like an animal scratching at the doors. Nothing could ever be found to account for the noises. Then the noises got violent. The Bell children would be... it just jumped on me. Hang on. Okay, go. The Bell children would be awakened from sleep by the sound of vicious dog fights in their rooms. Other times, they would hear the clank of heavy chains being dragged across the floor, or the racket of furniture being thrown around the room. The weird noises continued for a year. Then suddenly, things got much worse. The poltergeist activity escalated from noise to physical attacks on the family. The entity started with pulling bedclothes off of sleeping children. An overnight guest was woken by the covers sliding off of him. With a shout, he grabbed the covers, which were bunched up to look like a human form. He felt something solid under his hands and yelled in triumph, "I have the ghost!" The fire in the hearth was still burning, and the man jumped out of bed, still holding the bunched up sheets in his fisted hands. He intended to throw the ghost, sheets and all, into the fire and get rid of the tormenting entity forever. But before he got to the fireplace, the room suddenly filled with an overpowering stench. The smell was bad enough that the man started to retch. Instinctively, he dropped he dropped the wadded sheets and ran out of the room for some fresh air. When he could breathe, without heaving, he came back into the room. The nauseating stink was gone, but so was the ghost. Another time, John Bell's son Richard was rudely jerked from a sound sleep by something pulling his hair hard. It felt like the top of his scalp was tearing off. He screamed in agony, and John and Lucy came running into the bedroom. Then an equally ear-splitting shriek came from another bedroom. Betsy, Richard's sister, was being attacked in the exact same way. To add to the physical attacks, the entity had upped its repertoire of sounds, replacing the animal scratchings and gnawings were a variety of noises that sounded almost human: lip smacking, throat clearing, and exquisitely horrifying choking gurgle that sounded like someone being slowly strangled. A family friend, James Johnson, wanted very much to help the Bells with their troubles. He started talking to the ghost, trying to get the answer. At first, the only response he got was a faint whistling noise. Over the next few days, the air became filled with a feeble whispering that grew in volume until unmistakably there was a voice. By now, it was clear that Betsy Bell was increasingly the focus of the entity's attention. The haunting was a great source of stress for her, even more so because at one point, visitors to the house all but accused her of faking the voices using ventriloquism. John and Lucy called in a doctor to debunk this. The phantom voice spoke, and the doctor laid his hand on Betsy's throat. He swore he felt no vibrations from her vocal cords. This convinced him that Betsy was completely innocent of trickery or games. The Bell family and James Johnson peppered the ghost with questions, but the entity refused to give a straight answer. One day it claimed to be a Native American whose bones had been disturbed. Another day it said, "I'm a spirit who was once very happy, but have been very disturbed, and now I'm unhappy." That did nothing to narrow things down. The most specific answer the entity gave about its identity was that it was Kate Bat, a local woman accused of being a witch. But it wasn't Kate's ghost. Kate Bat was very much alive at the time, although she'd been driven out of the area by an angry mob some time before. The voice became many voices, sometimes stumbling over each other in their clamor to be heard. The voices called themselves the family of Kate Bat, which the Bell family assumed meant that the witch had summoned a host of spirits in a dark ritual. With the arrival of multiple voices came multiple personalities, although the family still referred to the entity as the witch. Not all of these personalities were malevolent. The witch had its favorites. On one occasion, the entity saved the life of one of the Bell children. One of the boys was crawling through a cave near the house. He was navigating a narrow passage when he got stuck in some quicksand. The cave suddenly glowed with an unearthly light, and a disembodied voice shouted, "I'll get you out." Something grabbed the boy's legs, he said later. It just felt like strong hands and pulled him to safety. It was Lucy Bell, John's wife, who was the witch's particular favorite. The ghost sat in on the Bible study groups Lucy led the Bell home. When the group decided to take a break, fruit would materialize out of thin air, falling into the laps of the stunned guests. Another time, Lucy was very ill and lay sick in bed. The witch cooed, "Lucy, poor Luce, how do you feel now?" Then, in a show of affection, it gently showered Lucy's lap with hazelnuts. When Lucy pointed out that the nuts were still in their shells, and she had no way of cracking them, the entity shelled the nuts for her. But other members of the family were victimized by the witch. It seemed to focus much of its malevolence on Betsy Bell. It would pull her hair or slap her face. The attacks would come without warning, and Betsy soon became a shivering, nervous wreck. 16-year-old Betsy was engaged to be married, and the witch would have none of it. When Betsy's fiancé, Joshua Gardner, came to court her, the entity would fill the air with crude talk about the couple embarrassing poor Betsy to tears. Sometimes the entity took a gentler tactic. When Betsy lay in bed at night, she would often hear the phantom voice pleading, "Please, Betsy Bell, don't have Joshua Gardner." Eventually, Betsy just gave up and broke off the engagement. The witch saved its most savage hour for John Bell. Early in the haunting, John had been plagued with weird stiffness in his mouth. He said it felt like someone had jammed a stick in his mouth and was turning it sideways, forcing his jaws apart. Whatever was on the inside of John's mouth caused his tongue to swell. He couldn't speak or eat for days at a time. His face would spasm and twitch, embarrassingly. Lack of proper nutrition and the sheer strangeness of his suffering took its toll, and John began to fade. By December 1820, he was seriously ill. He was in bed for a week, suffering almost continual torment from the witch. After several days, John seemed to rally a bit, and he felt well enough to go outside for a walk in his garden with his son Richard. But the pair didn't get far. Moments after they stepped outside the house, John's head rocked back with the force of a blow to his face. Stunned, he sat down on the log to catch his breath. His face started convulsing, as if someone was squishing his face and pinching his cheeks without mercy. Then, to add insult to injury, John's shoes flew off. Richard scrambled to grab them and knelt at his father's feet to slip them back on. But every time Richard put the shoes back on, they would yank themselves off again. The ghost cackled with delight. The ghost cackled with malice. The old man sat in his garden with tears of frustration rolling down his face, crying like a kid being tormented by a schoolyard bully. On the morning of December 20th, John Bell fell into a coma. Thinking to rouse his father, John Jr. went to the cabinet to fetch the medicine the family doctor prescribed. It was gone. In its place at the cupboard shelf was a strange flask, about 1/3 full of a dark, evil-looking syrup. In a panic, John Jr. sent a servant to fetch the doctor. The voice of the witch rose in a cackle, filling the room with the sound of his triumph. I put it there and gave old John a big dose of it last night, while he was fast asleep. I guess that fixed him, the witch bragged. The doctor arrived and inspected the liquid. He decided to test it on the family cat. The cat licked a little bit off of its spoon. Then it leaped into the air, whirled around 3 times, and dropped to the floor, unalived. Instead of handing the mysterious flask over to the sheriff, as he should have done, the doctor poured the rest of the flask's dark contents onto the fire, where it could do no more harm. By doing so, though, he destroyed any evidence that could have helped identify Bell's murderer. Had Bell been poisoned by someone very much in this world? But the harm was already done. The next morning, John Bell succumbed to the mysterious poison and slipped into the death. The witch didn't even let the family hold John's funeral in peace. It interrupted the service with shrieks of glee and a crude drinking song. Christmas in the Bell house was a somber affair that year. But the witch was ecstatic. On Christmas Day, the family was rudely awakened by the raucous voice of the witch, shouting carols at high volume and cackling manically. The family hadn't planned on any celebration, but they did decide to have a low-key exchange of presents. When they came downstairs, though, they found shredded wrapping paper all over the room. The presents were destroyed. Betsy Bell lived into her 80s. To the end of her life, she swore that the most horrendous episode of her life was the haunting, and that she would always remember 1820 as the year Satan stole my father, and Christmas, and Jesus wept with us. All right, one more, and then we're going to call it. Let me have some more water here. Gotta love this stuff, right? Oh, man. So dry today. Okay, the murder of Thelma Todd. I've known and respected your husband for many years. And what's going on for him is good enough for me. Groucho Marx, monkey business. Hollywood, bright lights, movie stars, fame so close you can taste it. The glamour of the movie business has lured many eager souls to California. Some hopefuls become stars, some stars become legends, and some stars burn brightly and then explode, victims of their own incandescence. Thelma Todd was born July 29, 1906, in Lawrence, Massachusetts. She was a bright little girl, a good student who had dreams of becoming a school teacher. After graduating high school, In 1923, she enrolled at the Lowell Normal School to work towards teaching a degree. But life and Thelma's mother had other plans. Seeing Thelma's fresh blonde beauty, Mrs. Todd encouraged her daughter to start entering beauty contests. Thelma did, and she did well in local pageants, and even won Miss Massachusetts in 1925. The prestigious win sent her on to the Miss America pageant. She didn't win, but there were talent scouts in the audience who were looking for fresh new faces for the young film industry. Thelma was invited to seek her fortune in Hollywood, which was just what Mrs. Todd wanted all along. Thelma proved to be a natural on the screen. In the 1920s were a heady time for the film industry. Hollywood was making the transition from silent movies to talkies. Some actors and actresses just couldn't make the leap, mostly because their voices didn't match their appearance. Thelma started her career in silent movies and played numerous supporting roles that showcased her beauty, but gave her little chance to act. That changed with the coming of sound. Thelma blossomed in the talkies. Thelma's voice, a bright, clear soprano with just a trace of northeastern lilt, matched her image beautifully. She had enough of a New England accent to sound aristocratic without coming off as snobby. Acting roles poured in for Thelma. In a Chicago Tribune article written in 1991, she was described as a cross between Goldie Hawn and Farrah Fawcett, only more popular. She played all kinds of roles, including parts in dramas and gothic horror films. But it was as a comedic actress that Thelma really shone. She made 115 pictures between 1926 and 1935. Producer Hal Roach paired her with Laurel and Hardy and led her to other studios, where she made films with Buster Keaton and the Marx Brothers, including Horse Feathers and Monkey Business. Stan Laurel was a particular friend of Thelma's, and he often requested that she be cast as a leading lady in his films. Thelma picked up a couple of nicknames in the business. She was known as Hot Toddy or the Ice Cream Blonde. But Thelma's life wasn't all ice cream and belly laughs. She married Pat DeCicco in 1932 and divorced him in 1934. Even before that, in 1931, she had started an affair with director Roland West. Soon, she and West were living together, sharing a house with West's ex-wife. The phrase, "it's complicated," is particularly apt here. And that wasn't the worst of it. When Thelma started working with Hal Roach, the producer made her sign a contract that included something he laughingly called the potato clause. But it was no laughing matter. The potato clause said that if Thelma gained over 5 pounds, she'd be fired. This had the potential to seriously damage Thelma's career. Sucked into the lavish Hollywood lifestyle, Thelma went to a lot of parties and did a lot of drinking, filling up on empty calories. Her mother worried that Thelma would jeopardize her meal ticket. Helpfully introduced her daughter to her diet pills. With her movie earnings, Thelma bought a restaurant in Los Angeles neighborhood of Pacific Palisades. Tourists, as well as Hollywood royalty, flocked to the popular restaurant called Thelma Todd's Sidewalk Cafe. The second floor of the building was a nightclub called Joya's, and the third floor was an issue. The riches of Los Angeles had attracted the attention of the mafia. The mobster, Lucky Luciano, had dreams of setting up an empire of prostitution, gambling, and extortion in L.A. He introduced himself to Thelma and started to make himself indispensable to the young actress. He got her hooked on potent amphetamines that kept the weight off better than her prescription diet pills. Thelma was intrigued by the air of rakish danger that Lucky Luciano represented. Mobsters were rich with their own brand of glamour, but even though she herself was a movie star, there was still a part of Thelma that tried to keep her New England schoolteacher innocence. Thelma Todd's Sidewalk Cafe and Joya's were intensely important to the young star. The restaurant and club were the first things Thelma owned that were really truly hers, and they were wildly successful. Visiting her Sidewalk Cafe in the 1930s was like dining at Spago's is today. It was a place to see and be seen. Thelma was protective of her investments. So when Lucky Luciano approached Thelma with a proposition, which was he wanted to rent the third floor of her building above Joya's and turn it into a gambling parlor, Thelma was appalled. She didn't care that Luciano was one of the biggest names in gangland. She channeled the gutsy, wisecracking heroine she played on the silver screen, as she told Luciano to go get stuffed. Another man with a compelling interest in Thelma Todd's Sidewalk Cafe was Thelma's boyfriend, Roland West. West wanted Thelma at the restaurant, drawing customers in with her star power, more than she wanted to be there. West called Thelma his money magnet, with rough affection. He told her, "You're my money maker. If you're not there, I'm not making money." On the night of December 14th, Thelma went to a gala Hollywood party thrown by her friend Stanley Lupino and his daughter, actress Ida Lupino. Unfortunately, one of the other guests at the party was Pat DeSico, Thelma's ex-husband. When he heard Thelma was going to be there, he apparently requested to be seated next to her at dinner. This, obviously, was not someone Thelma wanted to party with. Thelma threw back a few drinks, and she and DeSico argued. Thelma was also in the doghouse with her boyfriend, Roland West. The air owner, Sid Grauman, called West as the evening wound down, saying that Thelma was headed home and was a bit under the influence. Grauman tactfully suggested that perhaps West might want to pour Thelma into bed when she got home, but Thelma never made it home. Sometime in the wee hours of Monday morning, December 16th, 1935, Thelma Todd died in the garage of West's house. She was found by her maid Whitehead, slumped in the front seat of her Lincoln Phaeton. The official cause of Thelma's death was carbon monoxide poisoning, resulting from sitting in an enclosed garage with the car's engine running. But this doesn't explain the injuries Thelma suffered immediately before her death. A split lip, a broken nose, several broken ribs and bruises. Besides that, she'd been hit in the mouth hard enough to dislodge one of her dental fillings. She made an enemy, but who? Was it West, who had locked her out of their apartment that chilly December night? Was it Pat DeSico, who had ties with the mob? Could it have been Lucky Luciano? According to one story, when Luciano brought up the idea of putting in a gambling parlor on the third floor of Thelma's building over dinner one night, Thelma snarled at him, "Over my dead body." If the story is to be believed, Luciano replied, "That can be arranged." Whether Thelma's death was accident or suicide or murder, it shocked the acting world. The sassy, beloved comedian, not yet 30 years old, was gone. On the morning that Thelma's body was found, the day's mail delivery brought her a Christmas card to Stan and Ruth Laurel's home. The trunk of Thelma's car was full of Christmas presents for her friends and family. On December 23rd, 1935, Thelma Todd was laid to rest at Forest Lawn Cemetery. Crowds gathered to pay their respects to the actress who lay in a casket covered with mounds of yellow roses. Thelma was gone, but her spirit still wanders the hills of Hollywood. Her ghost has been seen near the restaurant that bore her name. Even in death, she's still glamorous, still dressed in an evening gown, mink coat, and jewels she wore to her last party. Sometimes she appears on the staircase of the building where she and Roland West lived, and in the garage where she was found dead. Witnesses have heard a car running and have smelled the sharp tang of gasoline. The garage hasn't been used to store cars in decades. All right, everybody, that's going to do it. That is going to do this. And this was a good read today. Lots of ghost stories. Lots of connecting ghost stories, connecting the dots. Anyway, so let me get up here. Kind of sunk down on you. Okay. Anyway, I'll be back at 4 p.m. Pacific. We're going to be working on building that National Lampoon Vacation cookie house. So join me live for that at 4 p.m. Pacific today. Otherwise, I hope you have a great rest of your weekend and enjoy. Go grab lunch. Do something like that. If you're over here on the other two networks that I can't mention, thank you so much for coming. Join me over at TikTok tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. Pacific. We'll be back to doing free readings for tarot card readings on TikTok. So come on over and join us over there under California Hots. Otherwise, I'll see you guys next week. Otherwise, I'll see you guys at 4 p.m. today again for that gingerbread house build. Let me get closed out over here, you guys. Maybe.